Have you noticed that movies don't really look like movies anymore? Today we're going to talk about the 7 reasons why.
Step forward!
There's a lot of theories out there, and I'm going to share mine. It does seem, though, that modern movies are kind of flat and plastic and cheap looking, even though they have the biggest budgets ever. And even some TV shows actually look more cinematic than the movies you'll see at the cinema.
Action!
And it's not CGI, it's not visual effects, it's not AI or filters or any of that stuff people like to blame. I think those are just scapegoats. I think there's something much more fundamental going on, and we're going to get to the core of what those things are and why movie making has changed as much as it has. The first thing you need to pay attention to is the lens selection. Modern movies have shifted to using much wider lenses in terms of focal length than they ever did before. This came at the same time that the sensors, digital sensors, started getting bigger and bigger, and we started getting these ultra wide field of views for YouTube content creators, but it's also made its way up into movies, and it really distorts the perspective. If you think of a traditional film set, you've got the set on one side, the crew on the other, and everything was shot at a distance. You're using longer focal length lenses, filming something that's happening away from you, where these wider focal lengths, these wider lenses, pull everything much closer. The camera is in the scene with the actors in the set. And it's a choice, it's a style, it's a look, it's an aesthetic, but it has become so common and pervasive.
It's showtime.
That it's really changed how these movies look. Instead of filming from a distance, seeing something happening and unfolding it at a more natural viewpoint, like your eye sees the world, we're now seeing stuff so close, so intimate, like you'd have a selfie YouTuber sharing their daily vlog. And now movies are starting to look like that too.
Stop this, it's gone too far.
The second thing that's come along with these wider lenses is the faster apertures and the shallower depth of field with those bigger sensors. So it used to be in the past that you would shoot a film on Super 35mm film, which is smaller than full frame, Super 35, and you'd shoot at like a t-stop of 5.6 or T8, T11 in a lot of cases, because most traditional cinema, you wanted to see the sets, you wanted to see the extras and the background and the vistas and the location and everything that was going on. And there would be times where you would have the shallow depth of field for a close-up on a face or a very intentional shot where you want the background more blurred. But a lot of times that blur was kind of annoying to filmmakers. They'd have to pump in tons and tons and tons of light just so that they could stop down on those apertures and get cleaner film grain, by the way, too. That's the other problem. The film was kind of slow. But there was all these factors at play. And back in the day, shallow depth of field was not the Goldilocks that it became. When digital came on the scene, the sensors were tiny and everything was in focus. And you never got that blur that you saw in the movies. And so digital filmmakers and content creators were chasing this bokeh constantly. And with the DSLR revolution and having full frame sensors that shot video, this feature was unlocked, and it's become the new norm, the new standard. Shooting everything at a 1.4, everything's just bokeh. You don't even see the background, you don't see the extras. It's all basically blur except for whatever is primarily in focus. And it's radically different than cinema of the past. And it just creates, again, this look, this aesthetic that digital filmmakers thought was cinematic, but has been pushed to the limit past what a traditionally cinematic movie would have ever done, to the point where now it looks cheaper because it is trying to emulate the cinema aesthetic, but pushing it past its limit. You've also got dynamic range being the end-all be-all for modern filmmakers. This obsession with that perfect roll-off on these digital sensors, trying to avoid any kind of clipping. The highlights have to be retained, the shadows have to be retained. Everything needs to be 10% to 90%. Nothing can be white, nothing can be black. Everything's got to be a shade of gray. And this is not film. Yes, film has a very large dynamic range. It has very nice roll-off into the highlights and the shadows. But honestly, digital is almost better than it now, to a point where things we have too much dynamic range. Everything's become flat and low contrast for the sake of retaining every single pixel of information. A window can never be blown out, a shadow can never be clipped, nothing can ever go outside those limits. And so we have so much detail within the frame that we have almost no contrast. We have all the dynamic range in the world, and yet everything looks kind of flat. And you'll notice it as the technology has gotten better, this problem has become more and more problem where things just look kind of gray and washed out now. It's because we just have so much dynamic range and we're not pushing things to the natural way, film would see it, or even the human eye. If you're inside and you walk outside, it's bright and blinding and almost overexposes your eye. Same thing if you're outside and you go inside, you walk in and it's black and shadowy and dark and you can't hardly see anything. We have an inherent contrast in the way we see the world. And so for an entire spectrum of light to be displayed perfectly exposed in digital just looks a little unnatural and it's a little off-putting.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
Along with dynamic range though, chasing these filmic results, people started soft lighting everything. And you see soft boxes and domes and china balls and book lights on every single light, everything as a modifier. And no one wanted to shoot harsh light. Everything had to be super soft for that sake of dynamic range, right? As the camera technology is getting better, well, along that journey, when it wasn't as good as it is now, people were trying to fix it by modifying their lights, making them softer and softer and softer and softer. But you end up losing even more contrast when you do that, because now you have no harsh light, you have no shape, you have no structure, you have no detail or texture. Whereas old school cinema, old movies, it was a giant harsh light. Like I said, blasting light at that scene, at the subject, to light everything up so they could get the film exposed properly, so they wouldn't have everything super blurry. These lenses of the past, let's not forget, these lenses weren't optically perfect like they are now. And so those fast apertures were really soft, so you didn't want to shoot there anyway. So there's a lot of reasons why film did stuff the way it did to avoid those limitations back in the day. And one of them was just the technology at the time was big, giant, hot, hard light. And yes, there's a time and a place for soft light, but we've gotten so far away from the hard light that everything now is flat, dull, and lifeless because everything is super soft and we have tons of dynamic range. We've also got this problem where the technology keeps getting better, improving, and it means that those higher ISO values are cleaner. In the past, things had to be lit to expose the film properly, and the same was true for digital for a long time. You had to shoot with low ISO values, otherwise the image would be super noisy. But algorithms and sensors have gotten better to where those high ISO values are super clean. And it's led to this pattern where people think they don't need to light. The cameras are so good in low light that it ends up being no light. And that also contributes to this factor. If you don't have light, you don't have shape, you don't have dimension. You need light and shadow and playing with those to create a beautiful, pleasing image that has contrast. If you just walk into a space and it's dimly lit and you just crank the ISO, chances are you're gonna get one of these flat, dull, muddy, lifeless images, because back in the day when they were doing night for film, they would light it. They would light night and make it, go watch Lord of the Rings and you'll see what I mean. Nighttime is bright and blue and it's more cinematic than just filming darkness now, cranking your ISO, and you're seeing in the dark, but most people, I don't think, would think night vision is cinematic because it's not. Cinema is a lot about the lighting. And you'll notice that as we're going through this, a lot of it has to do with just the way stuff looks, because that's how we see the world is through light. And the shadows matter as much as those light sources do. So paying attention to all of it is super valuable. And it's just something that's been kind of lost along the way as technology has gotten as good as it has. We've also got this other strange phenomenon with digital where we're able to do these really long takes. The oneer is the kind of classic new tentpole show-off kind of thing, to do the oneer, the one take. And yeah, it's cool that digital lets you record for hours, but it's kind of more spectacle than anything, really, just to have a really long take. Film, if you think film reels had a runtime, they ran out. You'd get to the end of the reel. And so filmmaking was done at a pace that was very precise, very intentional. It was get the shot, and then get the next shot, and then get the next shot, make sure we have the coverage to tell the story we want to do via storyboarding. And nowadays we have the luxury of just rolling endlessly for hours if we need to. You can just roll. It doesn't matter. You're not burning film anymore. It's just the cost is so insignificant. It doesn't really matter how long you record. And yeah, you can do cool things like oneers, but it also leads to patterns of behavior where we're letting these long takes kind of dictate how we're telling these stories. And then if you're trying to do those oneer shots or these longer takes, these continuous rolls, now you're probably moving lights further away. Your camera is more in the environment. Everything is kind of structured in a full 360. So we're kind of exaggerating all these problems of that we didn't have in old school cinema. Cinema felt away because it was kind of from a distance. So it's kind of the compound effect of the way this stuff adds and feeds into one another. They're all kind of related, and they're patterns that have emerged from technology and the new style and approach to filmmaking. But you've also got, with these long takes, crazy constant camera movement. I don't know if you've noticed this at all, but cameras move in ridiculous ways now. They kind of float like a video game through the scene, through the environment. And there was a point in time where this was new, it was novel, it was kind of cool. But at a certain point, it doesn't feel cinematic anymore. The cameras are so small and so lightweight. You can do the craziest camera moves, but none of that really feels all that cinematic. It feels more like a video game where the camera really doesn't even exist in the environment. It's just kind of floating and moving on a gimbal or a drone or whatever it is, being passed off. And it doesn't feel very cinematic. It can be impressive, certainly, but it's very rarely cinematic.
Camera's ready. Sound is ready. Places, everybody. Quiet, please. All right, Bill, turn him over. Speed.
Playback.
1, 2, 3.
Old school film, old school cinema, these cameras were big, they were heavy, they were noisy, they were kind of stuck and permanent in place. You put it on the tripod, you pointed at the thing, you rolled, and then you cut and you moved on to the next shot. It was a whole ordeal to get that next setup. Now you can just pass the camera around through a room, you can shoot handheld. All of it's very nice, it's very efficient, it's very economical. It can be the style, but it can also become pervasive where it just becomes the new norm, and then everything looks kind of the same and it's not really stylish anymore. You feel like something's been lost along the way, which was the old school cinema style and approach. So what's the answer? Well, it's hard, because I'm not saying that any of this is inherently bad. Maybe talking about it sounds like I think it's bad, but a lot of people will try and cover up all these new techniques and aesthetics with grain or black bars or trying to color grade it teal and orange, but none of that really fixes it. It's so fundamental, these problems that I've outlined, or these styles rather, because I can't say that they're problems necessarily. My kids watch old movies now and they say they look glitchy. The old stuff looks glitchy. And I kind of understand what they mean. Maybe they mean grainy. Maybe they mean the lighting is a little harsh. Maybe it's the way the actors talk.
We were your kids. We can punish ourselves.
There's a lot of styles that change over time. And I can't say that the new style is bad.
Always.
But it certainly doesn't feel like a movie anymore. But that's also from my perspective as someone who's been around a while. Younger people probably don't even notice, and they see the old stuff and think it looks old and dated and glitchy, like my kids would say. So I think there is some balance between the two. I think you can actually use modern technology and get the most out of dynamic range and use soft lights and shoot with wider lenses and shallower depth of field. You can do these things within reason, but I think you should still look at what made those Hollywood classics cinematic. And if that's your goal, you can emulate that with the new technology by stopping down on the aperture and having a deeper depth of field, by color grading and pushing your dynamic range to have the contrast that it deserves, by not just having soft lights everywhere, but popping a harsh hard light in there from time to time, and maybe using even a hot light and making your actors sweat a little bit too, because that's another big thing that's been lost along the way. Everything is so soft and matte. No one sweats, no one's dirty. Nothing in the frame can ever be ugly or bad or even textured. Everything is so soft and pillowy and polished. And I don't know that that's cinema, but I do think that there is a timeless balance between the old and the new that you can find if you're a content creator, someone who wants to make movies or just wants to have that cinematic aesthetic, I think you need to pay attention to this stuff and not fall into the trap that, you know, became what digital was overcompensating for. Digital was always trying to be film, and along the way, it kind of surpassed it, and we went too far in a lot of these areas to the point where we inverted and we became less cinematic by chasing all those old school cinema aesthetics. We pushed it too far, we were overcompensating, and now I think it's just about dialing it back a little bit in certain areas and focusing on what matters the most, which at the end of the day is good writing, good storytelling, and all the things that come along with that. Acting, editing, set dressing, wardrobe, hair and makeup, all of it matters so much. A movie is not just one part, but there's certainly things that make it less cinematic, and these were my 7.